The applause stopped so abruptly that Ellen's sound engineer thought someone had cut the audio feed. One moment, Ellen DeGeneres was celebrating everyday heroes with her usual warmth, her audience of 300 people enjoying inspiring stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The next moment, complete silence as she prepared to reveal a connection that would change two lives forever. Today we're going to witness something that proves the universe works in mysterious ways, Ellen said, her voice carrying an unusual weight. Sometimes the most important heroes are the ones we never knew we needed. The studio fell into expectant quiet. Ellen's expression had shifted from her typical playful energy to something deeper, more profound, as if she was about to share something that transcended entertainment. It was Wednesday afternoon at the Warner Bros. Studios in Burbank. Ellen's Everyday Heroes segment was being taped, the set decorated with photos of people who had made differences in their communities through simple acts of kindness. The energy had been exactly what producers expected: uplifting, heartwarming, filled with stories of human goodness that reminded viewers about the power of compassion. But sitting in the audience were two people whose lives had intersected in the most profound way possible, though neither knew it yet. Their presence would transform this ordinary Wednesday into television history and create the most emotional moment about fate, gratitude, and the mysterious ways that strangers can become angels in each other's lives. What Ellen knew, and what her guests did not, was that she was about to orchestrate a meeting that would redefine what it means to be a hero and reveal how sometimes the smallest acts of service can carry the weight of miracles. In the front row sat Maria Santos, a 45-year-old mother from Phoenix wearing a simple black dress and clutching a small silver locket. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, and her brown eyes carried the weight of recent grief, though she tried to maintain composure for the cameras. Around her neck hung a chain with a small angel pendant, a gift from her 22-year-old son Carlos before he died in a motorcycle accident 6 weeks earlier. 3 rows behind her sat David Chen, a 38-year-old Uber driver from Los Angeles, wearing his best button-down shirt and looking slightly nervous about being on television. He was a quiet man with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of long hours behind the wheel. Someone who had always believed that small acts of kindness mattered even when no one was watching. In his pocket, he carried a small card with a phone number he'd been asked to keep confidential, a number that connected him to the most important trip he'd ever taken. The show had progressed normally through its opening segments. Ellen danced through the audience with her characteristic energy, celebrating people who had gone above and beyond to help others in their communities. She interviewed a teacher who started a food pantry, a teenager who organized coat drives, and a retired nurse who volunteered at homeless shelters. The atmosphere was celebratory and inspiring, honoring people who had shown that heroism didn't require superpowers or grand gestures. Sometimes it just required showing up when someone needed help. During the Everyday Heroes segment, Ellen had been highlighting individuals who had made extraordinary differences through ordinary actions. She'd spoken with several guests about their community service, their volunteer work, and the ways they had chosen to make the world a little brighter. The stories were touching and motivational, showcasing the incredible capacity for goodness that existed in everyday people. Then Ellen paused, her expression becoming more serious as she prepared for what would be the most meaningful moment of the show. Today, I want to tell you about 2 heroes who don't know they're about to meet each other. She walked toward Maria Santos with a gentle approach that had made her beloved by millions. Maria, you're here today because 6 weeks ago you made one of the most difficult and generous decisions a mother could ever make. Maria looked up at Ellen with eyes that still carried fresh grief. Yes, after Carlos died, we decided to donate his organs. He always said he wanted to help people, even after he was gone. Ellen nodded, her own eyes beginning to fill with emotion. Maria, your son Carlos saved 4 lives that night. His heart went to a 34-year-old father of 3, his liver to a teenage girl, his kidneys to 2 people who had been waiting for years. The studio began to quiet as audience members sensed they were about to witness something far more profound than typical feel-good television. But there's something you don't know about that night, Ellen continued, her voice becoming softer. Someone very special helped Carlos on his final journey. Ellen turned toward David Chen, who had been sitting quietly, unaware that his presence was about to take on earth-shaking significance. David, you've been driving for Uber for 3 years. You've given thousands of rides to people going to airports, hospitals, celebrations, and everyday destinations. David nodded, still uncertain why he'd been invited to the show. Yes, I love driving. I meet interesting people, and I try to make their day a little better, even if it's just a comfortable ride. Ellen's voice carried the weight of approaching revelation. David, 6 weeks ago you got a very unusual request. A hospital asked you to transport something precious, not a person, but something that would save a person's life. The cameras captured David's growing understanding as the pieces began falling into place. The organ transport, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Ellen looked between Maria and David, both of whom were beginning to realize the magnitude of what was about to be revealed. Maria, I want you to meet David Chen. David, this is Maria Santos. The studio held its breath as Ellen continued. David, the organ you transported that night, Carlos's heart, it came from Maria's son. The silence that followed was profound. Maria's hand flew to her locket, her eyes widening as she looked at David with dawning recognition of his significance. David's face showed a mixture of awe and emotion as he understood that he had been entrusted with carrying the most precious gift one family could give to another. David, Ellen said gently, you didn't just drive that night, you were the guardian of a miracle. Maria slowly stood up and walked toward David, who also rose to meet her. The studio audience watched in complete silence as two strangers who had been connected by the most sacred of journeys finally came face to face. You carried my boy one last time, Maria said, her voice breaking as she reached for David's hands. You made sure he got to where he needed to go. David's eyes filled with tears as he held Maria's hands. Mrs. Santos, it was the most important trip I've ever taken. I drove so carefully that night, knowing I was carrying something that would save a life. Ellen, who had remained composed through thousands of emotional moments on her show, found herself openly crying as she witnessed this meeting between a grieving mother and the man who had helped her son's final act of love reach its destination. Maria, there's more, Ellen said, gesturing toward the backstage area. The man who received Carlos's heart wanted to meet you both. From backstage emerged James Mitchell, a 34-year-old construction worker with his wife and 3 young children. He walked slowly toward Maria and David, his hand unconsciously touching his chest where Carlos's heart now beat. Mrs. Santos, James said, his voice thick with emotion, your son saved my life. Because of Carlos, I got to see my daughter's first day of school, my son's baseball game, and my youngest take her first steps. Maria embraced James, feeling her son's heart beating strong and steady in another father's chest. Carlos would be so happy to know he helped you stay with your babies. David stood beside them, overwhelmed by the realization that his simple act of service had been part of a chain of love that connected a grieving mother, a saved father, and 3 children who still had their daddy. Ellen made an unprecedented decision. She walked to her desk and wrote out 2 checks, returning to the group with gifts that honored the extraordinary nature of their connection. Maria, this is for the Carlos Santos Foundation, $100,000 to promote organ donation awareness and support families going through what you've experienced. She handed David the second check. David, this is for you, $50,000 for being the kind of person who treats every passenger, every trip, every responsibility as sacred. But Ellen wasn't finished. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small wrapped box. This is for all of you. Inside the box were 3 matching silver pendants, each engraved with the same words, love travels through kind hearts. Maria, you gave the gift of life, Ellen said, fastening one pendant around Maria's neck. David, you carried that gift with reverence. James, you received it with gratitude. Together, you show us what miracles look like when they travel through human kindness. Ellen reached into her jacket and pulled out her personal business card. This has my direct number, she said, giving copies to Maria and David. Because what happened here today isn't just about organ donation. It's about recognizing the angels who appear in our lives when we need them most. As the episode concluded, Ellen addressed her audience with words that would be remembered forever. Today we learned that there are no coincidences, only connections we haven't discovered yet. Maria Santos lost her son, but gave 4 families their miracles. David Chen thought he was just doing his job, but he was carrying love itself. This is what happens when ordinary people do extraordinary things without knowing how extraordinary they really are. The episode aired exactly as it happened, becoming the most watched organ donation awareness segment in television history. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Organ donation registrations increased by 600% in the weeks following the broadcast, with many people citing Maria's story as their inspiration. David's story sparked a movement among rideshare drivers to recognize their role in helping people during critical moments. Uber created a special program training drivers for medical transport situations, using David's experience as a model. 3 months after their Ellen appearance, Maria had channeled her grief into advocacy work with the Carlos Santos Foundation. The foundation had already facilitated dozens of organ donations and provided support for grieving families navigating the donation process. David continued driving, but his perspective had changed completely. He approached every ride with renewed purpose, understanding that he might be carrying someone to the most important moment of their life. 6 months later, the entire group returned to Ellen's show, with news that brought the house down. James Mitchell's recovery had been so complete that he'd been able to return to work and was coaching his son's Little League team. His children had started a kindness club at their school, in Carlos's honor. "Carlos saved my dad's life," James's 8-year-old daughter told Ellen during their return visit. "And Mr. David made sure Carlos's heart got to him safely." They're both heroes. Maria had found unexpected peace in her friendship with David and James. They met monthly, not to mourn Carlos, but to celebrate how his love continued to ripple outward through the lives he'd touched. Ellen keeps a photo from that first day on her desk. Maria, David, and James holding hands in a circle, all wearing their matching pendants. Next to it sits a card from Carlos's organ recipient registry. 4 lives saved, countless others inspired. The silver pendants have become symbols of the foundation's mission. Organ donor families, transport workers, and recipients wear them as reminders that love travels through the kindest hearts and that every person in the chain of life-saving care is sacred. David's Uber still displays a small placard that reads, "Every ride matters." Passengers often ask about it, and David shares Carlos's story, spreading awareness about organ donation, one conversation at a time. The Carlos Santos Foundation has since facilitated over 200 organ donations and provides free transportation for donor families and organ transport. David volunteers as a driver, continuing to carry the most precious cargo with the reverence it deserves. Today, Maria Santos continues her advocacy work while treasuring her friendship with the man who helped her son's final gift reach its destination. She speaks at medical conferences about the importance of treating organ donation as a sacred process that connects families across grief and gratitude. James Mitchell lives each day knowing that Carlos's heart beats in his chest, and he's taught his children that the greatest gifts come from the greatest sacrifices. His family celebrates Carlos's birthday every year, honoring the young man whose death gave their father life. The meeting that Ellen orchestrated proved that sometimes the most important connections happen between strangers who become family through the most sacred of circumstances. David learned that driving an organ wasn't just transportation, it was a holy trust that connected a mother's sacrifice to a father's salvation. Because sometimes heroes don't wear capes. They drive carefully through the night, carrying miracles they don't fully understand. Sometimes the most important passengers are the ones who can't thank you for the ride. And sometimes a mother's love for her son can travel through a stranger's kindness to save a father's life and remind us all that angels appear when we need them most. Maria learned that Carlos's death wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of his legacy as a young man whose love continued to travel through the kindest hearts, carried by people like David, who understand that every act of service, no matter how small, might be someone else's miracle. The silver pendants that Ellen gave them that day now travel the world, worn by organ donor families, transport workers, and recipients who understand that love has no final destination, only new journeys. Each pendant carries the same truth that Maria, David, and James discovered, that in our darkest moments, strangers become angels, and angels become family through the sacred act of caring for one another. Carlos Santos died on a rainy Tuesday night, But his story didn't end with his last breath. It began with his mother's courage, traveled through David's careful hands, and lives on in James's grateful heart. Every day that James wakes up, every laugh from his children, every beat of Carlos's heart in his chest, proves that love is the only thing that truly survives death. Sometimes a young man's final gift becomes a father's second chance, delivered by a driver who thought he was just doing his job, but was actually carrying miracles through the night. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who never know they're heroes until someone like Ellen shows them the lives they've touched. And sometimes, in a world that can feel random and cruel, three strangers can teach us that there are no coincidences, only love finding its way home through the kindest hearts.